In 1955, a teacher could bend you over a desk and paddle you in front of the whole class, and your parents would thank her for it. That same year, children practiced hiding under their desks from an atomic bomb, drank warm milk from tiny glass bottles, and stood every morning to recite a pledge that had just been changed forever. School back then looked nothing like it does today. Some of these truths will make you grateful. Others will make your jaw drop. Number 11 was so normal nobody blinked, yet it would get a teacher arrested now. And number 2 shaped an entire generation in ways people still argue about. Before we count down, hit that subscribe button, because what your grandparents lived through every single school day might just shock you. Let's begin with number 30. Number 30, the morning milk in tiny glass bottles. Before the school day even started, a milk monitor wheeled a crate down the hall, and the soft clink of glass against glass meant a half pint was coming to every desk. The bottles were cold from the metal box near the loading door, capped with a little waxed paper lid you popped with your thumb. A bottle cost the school around 3 cents in 1955, subsidized so even the poorest child got their share. Children remember the cream that rose to the top and the race to drink it before it turned. That simple ritual fed a generation and asked almost nothing in return. Number 29, no air conditioning and barely any heat. Walk into a classroom in September and the windows were thrown wide open with a long wooden pole, the only defense against an afternoon that could push past 90 degrees. Kids fanned themselves with spelling tests while flies drifted lazily over the inkwells. Come January, the opposite war began. A single coal or steam radiator hissed and knocked in the corner, scalding the children nearest it and leaving the back rows in their coats. Rural schools ran on a pot-belly stove that the teacher stoked herself before sunrise. There was no thermostat, no snow day for cold, only the understanding that you dressed for the weather and learned anyway. Number 28, walking a mile or more in every kind of weather. Long before parents idled in pickup lines, most children simply walked, and not the short stroll we imagine. A mile each way was ordinary, 2 miles unremarkable, often along roads with no sidewalks and no crossing guards. There were no buses in many towns, so kids set out in clusters at dawn, lunch pails swinging, and trudged home in the dark of a winter afternoon. Rain meant a slicker if you were lucky. Snow meant wet socks all morning. Parents never worried the way we do now. The whole neighborhood watched the road, and getting yourself to school was simply your first job of the day. Number 27, the purple haze of the mimeograph machine. Every worksheet, every quiz, every field trip permission slip came off a hand-cranked drum that printed in a strange, beautiful violet ink. The teacher rolled out a fresh stack, and the smell hit you instantly, a sweet chemical tang of methyl alcohol that children would press to their faces and inhale the moment the paper landed on their desk. Those purple pages were always slightly damp, the lettering a little smeared where the stencil had worn thin. A machine cost a school a small fortune, so the teacher guarded it like treasure and cranked out copies by hand, arm aching by the 40th page. It was the scent of a brand new assignment, equal parts dread and delight. Number 26. Penmanship was a subject you could fail. Long before keyboards, the Palmer method ruled the classroom, and a child's handwriting was drilled like a military exercise. You sat upright, feet flat, the paper tilted at a precise angle, and you traced endless ovals and push-pull strokes across the page until your forearm burned. The movement was supposed to come from the shoulder, never the fingers, and a teacher would walk the rows, tapping wrists that drooped. Sloppy loops earned a poor mark on the report card, right next to arithmetic and reading. A whole generation came out of those rooms with handwriting so uniform it could pass for type. We let that skill quietly die, but in 1955, a beautiful hand was proof of a disciplined mind. Number 25, inkwells, blotters, and ruined shirt sleeves. Built into the top corner of nearly every wooden desk was a small round hole, and in it sat a glass inkwell filled by the teacher from a heavy bottle each morning. Children dipped steel nib pens and scratched their lessons onto paper, blotting each line so it would not smudge before it dried. The desk lid lifted to reveal a cubby of books, and the surface was carved with the initials of every student who had sat there for decades. Spills were a catastrophe, staining fingers blue for days and turning a white shirt into a lost cause. That inkwell, useless within a generation as ballpoint pens arrived, remains the truest fossil of a 1950s classroom. Number 24, the teacher rang you in by hand. There was no electronic chime, no recorded announcement over a speaker. The school day began when the principal or a chosen student stood on the front steps and swung a heavy brass handbell, the clang rolling across the yard and freezing every game of tag mid-motion. Children lined up by grade, often boys in one line and girls in another, and filed in under the teacher's eye. The same bell ended recess, called lunch, and dismissed the day. Its sound carried the authority of the whole institution in a single ring. Schools eventually wired in buzzers and bells on timers, efficient and impersonal. But something was lost when a human hand stopped marking the rhythm of the day. Number 23. Recess was rough and nobody hovered. When the bell let them loose, children poured onto bare dirt and asphalt yards with almost no adult in sight, and what happened next would terrify a modern parent. Boys played tackle games on hard ground, climbed iron jungle gyms, bolted over concrete, and spun merry-go-rounds fast enough to fling a kid into the dust. Skinned knees and split lips were simply part of the day, cleaned with a wet paper towel and sent back out. There was no rubberized surface, no padded equipment, no supervisor counting heads. Oral histories recall the freedom of it, the unstructured hours that built grit and imagination. We traded that wildness for safety, and the playground has been quieter ever since. Number 22, everyone learned to read with Dick and Jane. Open almost any first-grade reader in 1955, and you met the same cheerful family on a sunny suburban street. The sentences were short and endlessly repeated, built around the look-say method that taught children to recognize whole words on sight rather than sound them out. See spot run, run spot run. Generation after generation learned the alphabet's purpose from those bright, tidy pages and their picture-perfect world of a stay-at-home mother, a working father, and a dog named Spot. Reading specialists later fought bitterly over whether the method even worked. Yet for sheer cultural reach, no school book ever printed has matched the quiet empire of Dick and Jane. Number 21, memorize it, then stand up and recite it. Learning in 1955 lived in the memory, not the search bar. Children committed long poems, the Gettysburg Address, multiplication tables, and the capitals of every state to heart, then stood beside their desks and delivered them aloud while the class listened. A stumble brought a sharp correction and sometimes a snicker, so kids practiced at the kitchen table until the words were carved into them for life. Spelling bees were treated like sport, with the whole school gathering to watch the final two children battle over words like rhythm and conscience. This was education as performance and discipline, demanding and a little merciless. We gained convenience when we stopped memorizing, but we may have lost a certain muscle of the mind. Number 20. There were no calculators, only slide rules and your own head. Arithmetic was done in pencil and in the head, with long columns of figures checked twice and erased holes worn into the paper. Older students learning trigonometry and physics reached for a slide rule, a polished ruler of sliding scales that could multiply and find roots if you knew exactly how to read the lines. It took real skill, and a wrong placement of the cursor gave a wrong answer with total confidence. There was no machine to catch your mistake. Mental math was a daily exercise, the shopkeeper's arithmetic that everyone was expected to master. The pocket calculator that would make all of this obsolete was still nearly 20 years away, and in 1955 your sharpest tool was your own concentration. Number 19. The chalkboard ruled the room, and clapping erasers was a privilege. The entire front wall was a vast slate blackboard, and the steady scratch and squeak of chalk was the soundtrack of every lesson. A fine pale dust settled over everything, coating the teacher's dark sleeves and drifting in the window light. Being chosen to clap the erasers clean was a coveted honor, sending a lucky pair of students outside to beat two felt blocks together in great choking clouds while everyone else stayed at their desks. A teacher could fill that wall with diagrams, sentences to copy, and the day's assignments, then sweep it clean with a wet rag for the next class. Whiteboards and projectors eventually buried it, but for a century, the blackboard was the beating heart of the classroom. Number 18. Girls took home economics, boys took shop, and that was that. The school day split sharply down the middle of the sexes, and nobody questioned it. Girls were marched off to home economics to learn cooking, sewing, table settings, and how to run a household, sometimes carrying a sack of flour as a pretend baby. Boys went to the shop wing, where they cut wood, soldered metal, and built birdhouses and lamps under a cloud of sawdust. The curriculum prepared each for the life the era had already decided they would lead. Oral histories recall both pride and quiet frustration in those rooms. The wall between them stood for decades before it finally came down. Number 17. Girls were forbidden from wearing pants. Dress codes in 1955 were strict and absolute, and for girls that meant skirts or dresses every single day, no exceptions, even when the temperature dropped below freezing. A girl walking to school through the snow wore a dress with maybe a pair of trousers underneath that she had to remove the moment she arrived. Hemlines were measured, sometimes by a teacher with a ruler, and a girl could be sent home for a skirt deemed too short. Boys wore collared shirts tucked in, hair kept short and neat, no exceptions there either. It would be years before a girl could pull on a pair of slacks on a cold morning without breaking a rule. Number 16. Your report card graded your character. The slip of cardstock sent home each term carried more than grades in reading and arithmetic. Beside the academic marks sat a whole column for conduct, citizenship, neatness, and works well with others, each one a judgment on the kind of child you were. A teacher could give you an A in spelling and a D in deportment, and at home it was often the second mark that brought trouble. Parents signed the card and returned it, an unbroken loop of accountability between school and kitchen table. The teacher's assessment of your behavior was treated as simple fact. Children learned early that being smart was not enough, that the school was measuring their manners and their self-control just as carefully as their sums. Number 15. Public shaming was an accepted teaching tool. Discipline in 1955 was often a performance staged for the whole class to see. A child who misbehaved or failed to answer might be sent to stand in the corner, face to the wall for an hour. The truly unlucky wore the dunce cap, a tall paper cone, and sat on a stool at the front while the lesson went on around them. Some teachers made a struggling reader stand until they got it right, the silence stretching unbearably. The idea was that embarrassment would correct what kindness could not, and shame was applied openly and without apology. We came to understand how deeply that humiliation could wound a young mind, and the corner and the cone slowly vanished. But in 1955, they were simply part of keeping order. Number 14. Teachers smoked, and so did the school. Step into the faculty lounge in 1955, and you walked into a fog. Teachers smoked between classes, sometimes lit up at their desks during a study period, and the principal's office often had a heavy glass ashtray sitting right on the blotter. Cigarettes were woven into adult life so completely that no one thought to hide them from children, and tobacco companies even advertised in the magazines that landed in school libraries. High schools sometimes looked the other way when older boys smoked near the lot. The dangers were only beginning to be whispered about, and the great public reckoning was still years off. To a modern student, The idea of a teacher exhaling smoke over a stack of homework seems almost unbelievable. Number 13. Left-handed children were forced to switch. A child who reached for a pencil with the wrong hand in 1955 was often in for a quiet, persistent battle. Teachers believed left-handedness was a flaw to be corrected, so they tied the left hand down, wrapped the knuckles, or simply moved the pencil to the right hand over and over until the child surrendered. The Palmer method was built entirely for right-handed writers, and a lefty who resisted was branded stubborn or slow. Many gave in and wrote awkwardly with their offhand for the rest of their lives. Some developed stutters and lasting anxiety that researchers later linked to the forced switch. It was one of the era's quietest cruelties. Number 12. Hot lunch came from the lunch ladies, and it cost a quarter. The cafeteria was its own world, ruled by women in hairnets and aprons who ladled out a hot meal onto sectioned metal trays. The federal lunch program, only a few years old, kept the price down to around a quarter, and for some children, it was the most reliable meal of the day. The menu rotated through meatloaf, creamed chipped beef on toast, fish on Fridays, and a square of sheet cake if you were lucky. Milk came in those little bottles, and you carried your tray to long folding tables that sat the whole grade. That steaming, no-frills meal fed millions and built memories that outlasted the recipes themselves. Number 11. A paddle hung on the wall, and the teacher could use it. Corporal punishment was not only allowed in 1955, it was expected, and the wooden paddle was a fixture of the American classroom. A child who talked back, cheated, or fought might be marched to the front, bent over the desk, and struck on the backside while the class watched in silence. Some teachers drilled holes in the paddle so it would swing faster. The principal kept a heavier one for serious cases, and a trip to his office was dreaded for exactly that reason. Parents almost universally backed the teacher, and a child who complained at home was likely to be told they must have deserved it. What would end a career today was, in 1955, simply Tuesday. Number 10. Mass vaccination happened right in the gymnasium. In April of 1955, the nation held its breath as Jonas Salk's polio vaccine was declared safe and effective. And within weeks, the campaign rolled straight into the schools. Children lined up by the hundreds in gymnasiums and cafeterias, sleeves rolled, while nurses worked down the rows with syringes and a permission slip signed by every parent. There was no debate and very little fear because polio had terrified families for a decade, and the vaccine arrived like deliverance. The school became the front line of one of the greatest public health victories in American history. Oral histories recall the relief on the parents' faces more than the sting in the arm. The gym floor saved a generation. Number 9. The day often began with a Bible and a prayer. In 1955, it was entirely ordinary for a public school morning to open with a passage of Scripture and a recited prayer led by the teacher with the whole class standing. In many districts, it was required by law, the reading of a few Bible verses followed by the Lord's Prayer before the first lesson began. Children of every faith and none stood together and spoke the words, and a student who stayed silent stood out sharply. It was woven into the rhythm of the day as naturally as the flag salute. The Supreme Court would not strike down mandated school prayer until 1962, so for the children of 1955, it was simply how school started. That daily ritual, unthinkable in most public classrooms now, was once as routine as sharpening a pencil. Number 8. The pledge had just been rewritten. Every morning began with the class on its feet, hands over hearts, facing the flag in the corner to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. But the words the children of 1955 spoke were brand new. Just the year before, in 1954, Congress had inserted the phrase "under God" into the pledge, and teachers across the country were drilling the altered line into students still used to the old version. The change came at the height of the Cold War, meant to draw a sharp line between America and godless communism. That small revision, carried into millions of classrooms each dawn, made the schoolhouse a quiet battleground in a much larger war of ideas. Number 7. Children practiced surviving a nuclear attack. Few truths capture the strangeness of 1955 like the duck and cover drill. At the sound of a special alarm, children dropped to the floor beneath their wooden desks, curled away from the windows, and covered their necks with their hands, taught that this would shield them from an atomic blast. A cartoon turtle named Bert showed them how. The teacher pulled the shades, and the room went silent as small bodies crouched under furniture that would have been vaporized in a real strike. The fear was real and woven into the ordinary. A generation of children who learned arithmetic in the morning and rehearsed the end of the world after lunch. The mushroom cloud lived quietly inside the schoolhouse. Number 6. Some children wore dog tags to school. The dread of the atomic age went further than drills. In cities like New York, schools issued metal identification tags for children to wear around their necks, stamped with their name and details. The grim and unspoken purpose was identification of the dead or injured after a nuclear strike, when a child might be separated from family or worse. Parents fastened the little chains each morning, much as they tied shoelaces, and the children wore them without fully grasping why. Civil defense had reached into the youngest lives in the most chilling way imaginable. Oral histories recall the tags with a shudder, ordinary objects that carried an extraordinary darkness, proof of just how seriously the era took the threat hanging over every classroom. Number 5. Polio could close the pool, the theater, and your school. Even with the vaccine arriving in 1955, the shadow of polio still hung heavy over childhood. For years, parents had lived in summer terror, pulling children from swimming pools, movie houses, and crowded gatherings the moment an outbreak was reported. A classmate who vanished mid-year might return in leg braces or a wheelchair, or not return at all. The image of the iron lung, a great metal cylinder breathing for a paralyzed child, haunted every family. Schools sometimes shut their doors during a flare-up, and the empty desk of a stricken friend was a quiet horror that children of the era never forgot. That a needle in the school gym was about to end this nightmare made 1955 a true hinge of history. Number 4. Children with disabilities were simply turned away. One of the most jarring truths of 1955 is who was not in the classroom at all. There was no federal guarantee of education for children with disabilities, so a child who was deaf, blind, used a wheelchair, or had a developmental delay could be lawfully refused enrollment and sent home for good. Families were often told their child was uneducable and left to cope entirely alone, or to place the child in a distant institution. The bright, busy classroom belonged only to children who fit a narrow mold, and the rest were rendered invisible. The law protecting these children would not arrive for another 20 years. Oral histories from those families carry a deep ache, a generation of bright minds shut out before they ever reached the door. Number 3. Schools were still segregated, despite the law. In May of 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that segregated schools were unconstitutional, but in 1955, the actual classrooms had barely changed. Across much of the country, black and white children still attended entirely separate schools, the black schools chronically underfunded, crammed into older buildings with secondhand books and a fraction of the resources. The court's follow-up order that year, demanding integration with all deliberate speed, became a loophole for endless delay, and resistance hardened into a wall. A black child in 1955 might walk past a closer, better-funded white school to reach the one she was allowed to enter. The schoolhouse stood at the very center of America's deepest reckoning, and the children lived it firsthand. Number 2, the teacher's authority was absolute and unquestioned. In 1955, the word of the teacher was something close to law. There were no parent emails contesting a grade, no meetings to challenge a punishment, no sense that a child's version of events might outweigh an adult's. If you got in trouble at school, the safe assumption at home was that you had earned it, and a second helping of consequences often waited at the kitchen table. Teachers were addressed only as sir or ma'am, eyes forward, hands folded, and a student who spoke out of turn felt the full weight of the room turn cold. The relationship between school and family was a united front, and the child stood alone on the other side of it. Number 1. School could end early and forever by 8th grade. The most shocking truth of all is how few children in 1955 ever saw a high school diploma. For huge numbers of American kids, especially in rural areas and working families, formal education ended around the 8th grade, somewhere near 14 years old. A boy was expected to take up work on the farm or in the factory beside his father, a girl to help at home until marriage, and leaving school for a paycheck was not failure, but duty. The one-room schoolhouse, where a single teacher taught every grade at once around a single stove, still dotted the countryside, and for many children, it was the whole of their schooling. The classroom we now take for granted as a guaranteed path was, in 1955, a door that closed early for millions. Across all 30, from the clink of the milk bottle to the schoolhouse door that closed at 14, these truths reveal a world that was both simpler and far harder than the one we know. Some will make you grateful for how far we have come, others a little wistful for what we traded away. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments and tell me if your parents or grandparents lived through any of these. If this brought the past to life for you, hit that like button and subscribe for more.